Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to lesson 10 of our program. We still have people arriving as usual, and hopefully everybody will be in a moment. I'd like to call to your attention this first slide because it really captures the essence of how to achieve whatever goals you're after. You begin with vision. And the mission is always to achieve that vision. You then set some specific goals, smaller things that you need to accomplish to achieve your mission. And not only do you have a strategy for achieving the mission, but you also have strategies for each of the goals. And so there's really some circularity in there, but it gets complicated to try to show all that. And then following strategy, you have to implement the strategy that you've chosen, and if you continue to do that and achieve your targets, then you'll be successful. So it's interesting that this is a roadmap for project management as well as a general roadmap for success. And as I told you in an earlier session, we have a triangle that looks at success principles, project management principles, and innovation. And the three of those combine to help people be successful. So moving into the material, first a brief review of last session. We talked about the rule of five, finding 5 things that you can do today that will move you closer to your goal. We said that one of the things to differentiate yourself from other people with is to exceed expectations. We also talked about the benefits of keeping score so that you can measure your progress. And we talked about ridding ourselves from the traumas that occurred in the past that may prevent us from being successful in the present. So hopefully some of you found at least some of those techniques useful. There's actually quite a bit there to work on, and so if you start working on implementing these as you go along, that will help. I should say, by the way, this is our last live session, and it didn't occur to me until today that this is just before Labor Day, so there may be a number of people who won't be here tonight because they've already left for the long weekend. So fortunately, they'll be able to pick up the recorded session when they get back. And I will record the last 2 sessions and put them on the website in the next couple of weeks. One of the things you may not know about GoToWebinar is that you schedule all 12 sessions at the very beginning, and the system sends out announcements automatically. I don't have to do anything. Unfortunately, when I canceled last week, the system then sent out a notice saying it was on and confused a couple of people. So I'm sorry about that. There's no way to change it unless I canceled everything, and so we're just kind of a victim of a system that normally works pretty well. Okay, so what are we going to do tonight? We're going to talk about building and maintaining relationships, having crucial conversations, applying the 80-20 rule, and handling email. And this will give you some more things to work on, so here goes. As this slide says, there's no doubt that success in life depends a great deal on having good relationships with people. You may need support from other people, and you certainly depend on other people to buy your products or pay you for the service that you provide them. However, one of the problems that we have in our culture today is that we've got a lot of people that are on the make, so to speak. They are go-getters and instead of being go-givers. And one of the problems with that is that when you're always on the make trying to get from other people, then people start to feel like they're being used, that the only thing that you really care about is what they can do for you. And that, of course, is going to cause them to start avoiding you like the plague. Yes, I meant Memorial Day, not Labor Day. Well, it's not September yet. Okay, so one of the principles that I really liked from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is the comment that he made that we should seek first to understand other people and then to be understood. And of course, we tend to turn that around, and we press very hard to get other people to understand us without particularly trying to understand them. And we also forget that communication has two components. It has both a sending component and a receiving component. And a lot of the communication courses that I've seen focus on the sending part, the talking part, or the delivery of information to other people. And very seldom does it say very much about listening and receiving. So I just want to point out to you that there are probably a whole lot more poor listeners than good ones. We listen to argue, to criticize, to gossip, but very seldom do we really listen to understand the other person, especially when things start to get a little bit tense or heated. And yet, one of the most important things to most of us, probably, is to feel that other people understand us. Now, one way to convey to someone else that you really are trying to understand them is to listen to them actively. Passive listening is simply nodding your head and saying, I hear you, or I understand. And I know you've probably had the experience of having someone say that to you, and you knew very well that they didn't understand at all. So active listening as opposed to passive listening is when you periodically reflect back in your own words your understanding of what the other person has said. And one of the cautions here is don't parrot. If someone says the book is green and you say, okay, I understand that you said the book is green, that doesn't convey anything except that you heard the person. And you should listen between the lines. Try to listen for the feeling that the person's expressing and try to empathize with that and at least reflect back, okay, so I sense that you're feeling upset or hurt or angry or sad or whatever the emotion may be. That really does convey to someone else that you're trying at least to understand, even if they don't think you're able to. Let's face it, there are some things that we can't understand because we don't have the life experience of the other person. We never will have the life experience of the other person, and therefore the best we can do is to relate in some overlapping sort of a way. But at least if we try to understand the other person, it conveys to them that we respect them, that we're trying to meet them at least as part way as far as we can, and that's going to go a long way toward maintaining a good relationship or repairing one that's broken. I don't know how many of you have read this book. It came out in 1936. Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I don't remember how old I was when I first read it, but it was probably way back in the 50s or so. And it's been one of the most influential books of all times. Unfortunately, I've met a lot of people who have read the book or who have been to actually one of Dale Carnegie's courses, and they think that the title really is How to Manipulate People. And they try to apply all the techniques from the book, but in a very insincere manner. So, for example, listening to understand instead of to be understood is something that they may fake, but they really don't care sometimes, and it comes across that way. People simply see through such ruses, and it usually backfires. If you're not genuinely interested in other people, don't pretend to be. My suggestion, of course, is that you find a way to be genuinely interested in people. I've said to managers many times, you can't be successful unless the people who report to you do their jobs correctly and make you a success. And so there's an interdependency there, and this is true in all teams. One of the things that we talk about in building teams is that it's a group of people who work together in a cooperative way to achieve a common goal or objective, and interdependence is one of the major components of those sorts of activities. And so if we think about relationships in that way, we know that we don't live on an island, as Thomas Merton once wrote in one of his books. We live in a social world, and one of the things that we're seeing happen, as John Naisbitt said many years ago, and I said this last time I believe, we're beginning to live in a high-tech, low-touch world. Relationships are less and less important, so it seems, and actually it's probably the opposite. One of the things that Carnegie pointed out is it's more important to be interested in others than to try to be interesting to others, and yet this is exactly what many of us try to do. We try to be interesting instead of being interested in other people. Now again, if you're not interested in someone, if you just start asking, well, what do you like to do, and why do you like to do that? It starts to sound like an interview situation instead of a genuine interest. And if you pay attention to how people talk when they're in a conversation where they are interested in what the other person does, you'll notice that there's a give and take. There's back and forth. Each party will share some thoughts with the other about their activities and what they like to do. So try to find ways, if you're not particularly interested in a specific thing a person tells you, try to be interested in why they're interested in it. That's another way to approach it. So at least you're conveying to them that there's something about them that you care about. Some of the stuff I'm going to do tonight, again, draws from Jack Canfield's book, and if you haven't bought the book and haven't started reading it, I really do encourage you to buy that book and read it and continue working with it, because it's not a book that you can just read cover to cover and then put it away and you're there. You really have to work on every single chapter and principle that he presents. And so I got these 4 questions from Jack's book, and he actually got them from someone else, and I've forgotten now who he credits with them. But these questions are really interesting and useful for anyone who's trying to get ahead in this world. So question number 1, if we met 3 years from now, what has to have happened for you to feel good about your progress? Now, think about that. What has to have happened for you to feel good about your progress? One of the things that forces us to do is actually to look backwards, to assume that we have achieved the objectives or the goals that we set for ourselves, and to look back and ask ourselves what intermediate steps would we have had to take, and what intermediate goals would we have had to achieve in order to have reached the final. What are the biggest dangers or hurdles that you'll have to face to make that progress? In project management, we would call this risk management. We try to identify the risks, the things that could go wrong, and try to deal with those proactively to prevent them if possible, and if not, to at least have a contingency plan to deal with them if they do occur. The simplest way to identify those is to ask yourself what could go wrong. One of the big failures that people have in projects particularly, but also in personal life, is to assume that everything is going to go very smoothly, and then when things go wrong, it throws them off balance. So you don't want to get morbid about this, but playing what-if games, what if this happened, what would I do about it, can be a very useful approach to managing risks, as we have said in previous sessions. Pardon me. The next one is to ask yourself, what are the biggest opportunities you have and that you need to focus on to achieve the results you're after? Somebody once said that luck is actually a matter of seeing opportunities and seizing them when they occur. And the unlucky person never notices that those opportunities are out there. It's really amazing, if you think about it, that most of the world's problems represent huge opportunities for someone. Someone will solve those problems, and in the process of solving those problems, probably be very enriched in the process. And so if you look around and ask yourself, what kind of needs are being unmet? What are things that people are crying out for in some way? When people start complaining about something, that's an opportunity that somebody can help them solve. So what are the big opportunities that you have and that you need to focus on in order to achieve the results you're after? what strengths will you have to maximize, and what skills will you have to develop in order to achieve your goals? This is a self-assessment so that you can ask yourself, okay, what are my positive skills and strengths that I want to maximize? And then if there are any deficiencies out there, any skills that I lack, what are those and how will I go about developing them? And you see, all of this is aimed at helping you take charge of your life instead of just being a victim of circumstances and drifting along. So this is a really good set of questions to ask yourself. It's also a good set of questions to help your friends with if they're struggling with trying to get ahead or achieve their own goals and objectives. And it might be useful for those of you that have children to ask them as they start to leave high school and go into college and so on. It's a really scary proposition for all of us, because at that age most of us don't have a clue what we really want to do with the rest of our lives, and even after a few years of working you probably don't. In fact, today they say that most people will change careers and jobs and that sort of thing far more than they did 20, 30 years ago. So it's an increasing rate of turnover. Okay, tonight I want to talk a little bit about one aspect of maintaining good relationships, which is to deal with crucial conversations. And there is a book by that title by Carey Patterson and a number of other authors. So Crucial Conversations, if you go to Amazon and check it out, you'll find the book. And this is one of, I think, 4 books that they've published that are really useful books for helping us deal with influence and relationships and achieving our objectives. A crucial conversation is one that should occur when there are strong emotions involved, there are high stakes, that is, there's something very, very important to us that we may win or lose if we don't get things right. And opinions, it says vary in their book, I would say differ. Opinions differ. We have different ways of looking at the situation. And in my classes, I ask people to give examples of these in terms of jobs, social settings, and personal relations. Just a couple. In terms of jobs, one of the crucial situations that we encounter is performance deficits. If you're a project manager and someone in your team isn't performing well enough, then you need to have a crucial conversation with that individual about their performance. And I can promise you that when you have those conversations, all 3 of these segments of the pie are going to be involved, because the other person generally goes into denial and says, I'm doing just fine, it's you, you're being unfair, you're critiquing me unfairly, and so on. And of course there's a great deal of emotion there, and the high stakes are that the person's job is at stake. So that's a job-related one. In social settings, sometimes political situations occur, same sort of thing. You don't see eye to eye with someone about something. It gets very heated sometimes, and it can cost you seriously in terms of your personal life or your business life or whatnot. And then, of course, all of us go through these things in our personal lives on an occasional basis at least, and hopefully it's not too often, but it does happen. One of the problems we have is that when these things happen, as the saying says, or the quote says here, often when it matters most, we're at our worst. And the question is why? Why is that? Well, we're not necessarily designed correctly in the first place. We tend to get very uptight when we have these kinds of situations, and one of the mechanisms for dealing with those things is flight or fight. And so we either fight the other person or we run, and neither of those resolves the problem or the issue. We're also under pressure in many cases. When the stakes are high, we're feeling pressured to deal with the situation in such a way that we get the outcomes we're after, but we may be stumped as to how to do that, because as Dr. Phil said in one of his books, most of us didn't have very good role models for learning to deal with issues between ourselves and other people, and so we simply lack the skills. And that's what these books by these guys are intended to do, is to help us develop those kinds of skills that we need to deal with interpersonal issues. I know I'm talking a lot about projects tonight because that is something I deal with all the time, and everything I'm saying about projects also spills over into other arenas of our lives. But it was interesting to me that in the book they say they studied 2,200 projects and found that you can predict with nearly 90% accuracy which projects are going to fail months in advance. Months in advance. And the predictor of success or failure was whether people could hold 5 specific crucial conversations. I've listed 3 of them on the slide, and to be candid, I don't recall what the other 2 are, but I felt like they weren't as important as these. And so the first one is that the scope or schedule for your project is unrealistic. A lot of times the scope and schedule have been dictated by senior managers or sponsors, and they are unrealistic, but people are afraid to speak up and say, hey, I'm sorry, this is really unrealistic, because they're afraid that if they say that, they're going to lose points. And bosses often say, well, if you can't do it, I'll find someone that can. I mean, this is mental coercion at its best, and I've seen it many times in organizations. Number 2, you have a team member who's not doing as much work as they should be. They're not carrying or pulling their own weight, as we say. And it's very uncomfortable to confront these things. And so, again, we tend to avoid them instead of talking through them and trying to work them out. We also find that people are not providing leadership, whether it be us as project managers or our bosses. Sometimes we are sitting around wondering what do they really expect of us, and they don't tell us very well, and so that's a very frustrating situation. And so these are situations where we really do need to confront the situation. And by the way, that's the title of one of the books in the series. Is called Crucial Confrontations, and it talks about how to confront a situation like this in such a way that you can resolve it instead of winding up in World War III. The mistake most of us make in our crucial conversations is to believe that we have to choose between telling the truth and keeping a friend. In other words, if we tell the truth, we're going to lose a friend. You know, it happens. There's no question about it. There are people out there that can't accept the truth, and when you tell them the truth, they're going to start really laying into you and telling you what a turncoat you are, what a terrible friend you are. In fact, you're not a friend at all. You're an enemy. I mean, they'll really light into you and give it to you with both barrels, as we sometimes say. But this is the fool's choice. We're afraid that if we speak up, we'll create an enemy, and so instead we suffer in silence, and nothing gets resolved. And if you're in a close relationship with someone, and like a marital relationship or partnership of some kind, business partnerships, for example, this is a very tenuous situation to be in. Now, what the authors of these books have found is that in like 20-some years of observing conversations that worked and conversations that didn't work, they found that at the core of every successful conversation lies the free flow of relevant information. In other words, the channel stays open, people keep talking, they keep exchanging information, talking about their perceptions, the facts, etc. And this free flow of meaning itself leads to success, because one of the problems that we have is there is no absolute meaning in any situation except the meaning you attribute to it. And what you can bank on is that one person is attributing one meaning to the situation and the other person is attributing a totally different meaning to it. And it's a matter of perception on both parts. And you might say misperception, but that's not necessarily true. Your perception is your reality. Now, attributing motives to the other person, of course, is mind reading, and we often do that. Well, you were just trying to hurt me, or you were just trying to make me angry, or you were trying to take advantage of me. We don't know that at all. Even if the person said they were, we don't know for sure that they're telling us the truth. And so if we can talk about the issue and find out what it means to each side, then we can clear the air, as they say. I have a friend who I had a communication problem with not long ago, and part of it was the fact that just the way he communicates was different than the way I'm used to, and I interpreted his communication one way, and he certainly didn't intend it. So when we talked about it, it was possible to resolve the issue. Now, the second question you want to ask yourself is, if the free flow of meaning leads to success, the question is, what can you do to encourage meaning to flow? And of course, the answer is you need to have an open dialogue. People who are skilled at dialogue try to make it safe for everybody to add their meaning to the shared pool of knowledge and meaning and information. And that includes ideas that at first you might think they're controversial or just dead wrong, or they're at odds with your own beliefs. But this has to be examined and discussed in order to resolve a conflict with someone else. Now, one of the major causes of getting into difficulty in our culture, at least, is needing to win. We're a very competitive society, and there's nothing wrong with being competitive, by the way, but that competition can sometimes take over our thinking to the point that it's the only thing that matters. And a large number of TV shows make heroes out of people that win at sports or game shows and so on. And so we grow up believing that have to be a winner, in spite of the fact that we have that old saying about it doesn't matter who wins or loses, but how you play the game that counts. And believe you me, there's a lot of people that really don't believe that at all. Another thing that sidesteps us, of course, or gets us off track is that we get so angry that we want to move from, or that we move from wanting to win to wanting to punish the other person. All I care is I just like to smack that so-and-so. And I've been there, you've been there, I'm sure. If you haven't, congratulations, because most of us have experienced situations where we get so angry that all we want to do is slug the other person. And of course, in our society, that's not a good thing to do, because you're going to wind up behind bars if you're not careful. And of course, it doesn't resolve anything anyway, so it doesn't help you. So here's the way to approach these things. The first thing is to ask yourself these three questions. Refocus your motives by asking, what do I really want for myself? And what do I really want for others? And what do I really want for the relationship with these other people or the other person? Now, this is really important, because one of the things that happens to us is that as I said, we get so caught up in the heat of the moment that we totally lose sight of our objectives. And of course, we don't care about the other person at all in some cases. We saw this last week or a couple of weeks back when we talked about conflict and how much concern do we have for ourselves and how much concern do we have for other people. If we have a strong concern for making sure that our needs are met and the other person's needs are met, then we are inclined to take a win-win position. If not, if all we care about is ourselves, then we just run over the other person. And of course, if we care more about the other person than ourselves, then we tend to accommodate to them. And all of those are valid positions, perhaps, but in any case, we need to ask those questions. Once we've answered those questions, then we ask ourselves, how would I behave if I really wanted these results? Because in many cases, when we look at it, we find we're not behaving consistently with what we say we want to do. And so that's the first step. Then the next step is to ask yourself what you don't want. And if you think about where the relationship may be going, if it stays in a very conflicted way, it may very well dissolve, and that may not be what you want at all. And yet sometimes inertia just carries people forward through those kinds of situations. And of course, the ultimate of this is between countries or teams, like in management labor relationships, or between countries where we have a war. And this is one of the problems with the not taking care to escalate a situation. So tie the don't want to what you really want, and ask your brain to start searching for healthy options to bring you to dialogue. I've told you in the past that if we ask ourselves questions our brain starts searching for answers, for solutions. And your subconscious is way smarter than your conscious mind. You may not be able to see your way through these things, but your subconscious does. Now, while I'm thinking about it, let me just point out to you that one of the ways to see a solution is to ask yourself, if you had a friend that was embroiled in that situation and they came to you for advice, what would you tell them? How would you tell them to go about it? I was in a class just last week and told this to a class, and I said, this is a good technique to use for children. And it turned out that that very evening, one of the guys in the class was dealing with his son who had a problem. And he said, well, if your friend asked you how to deal with this, what would you tell him? And the boy told him, and he said, well, do you think that might work for you? And sure enough, it did. So the principle, of course, is that when you dissociate yourself from the situation and think about it being someone else's problem, then you can be a whole lot more objective about it. So if you get really stuck, try that. That's a very useful technique. Now, the big thing that you need to learn to do is look closely at the situation and notice when safety is at risk. That is, when people are not feeling safe, that's when the situation tends to deteriorate and never get resolved. So how do you see those signs? Well, watch for signs that people are being fearful. How do you know they're being fearful? Well, look at that guy's face. Does that guy's face convey that he's afraid of something? It seems to me it does. Whether it does or not, there are going to be cues that you get from the other person. They may clench their jaw. They may avert their gaze. They may start changing skin color, getting angry or whatever it may be. But if people are afraid, they clam up on you or they go on the attack, either one, fight or flight. When it's safe, you can say just about anything as long as you word it correctly. And again, it's not the content of what you say, but the condition of the conversation that makes people defensive. In my How to Communicate, Influence, Negotiate seminar, one of the first things I tell people is it's not what you say, it's what you convey about how you see the other person that makes them react. And if you convey to them that you don't respect them or that you are trying to hurt them in some way, then of course they're going to react to defend themselves. When you fear that people aren't buying into your ideas, you start pressing too hard. If you're afraid that you might be harmed, you start withdrawing and hiding, or you start retaliating. So again, it's not the content of what you're saying, but the condition of the conversation that makes people defensive. And so pay close attention not just to what's being said, but how people are responding to what's being said. So how do you create conditions for safety? Well, one way to do that is to find common ground. As we say, what can we both agree on here? I'm going to just back up to this slide for just a second. What do I want for me? What do I want for the other? And if you can find that both of you are looking for the same thing, then you can go a long way toward resolving the conflict immediately. So mutual purpose means that other people can see that you're working toward a common outcome and that you care about their goals, their interests, and their values. One of the big problems about values is that when we have a conflict about values, that is what's important to us, and this comes into situations where people have differing views of religion or politics or something of that nature. If you can't resolve values, the only way you do that would be to try to force the other person to change their values to agree with yours, or to cave in and change your values to agree with theirs, and that's not going to happen. So what you have to do is focus on the tangible result of those values differences and respect that the other person has a right to see things the way they do, and you have a right to see the way you do, but you have to deal with the effects of those differences, okay? And this is a part of all negotiating techniques that we teach. The other condition for safety is mutual respect. And without mutual respect, there's no condition for continuing a conversation. I mean, if you just flat don't respect somebody, why would you even want to talk to them? And so feelings of disrespect often come when we dwell on how others are different from ourselves. Now, I picked this slide because to me this is a good illustration of how we can start to see differences. I mean, these two guys are dressed differently. One of them looks a little bit more affluent than the other. One of them has a little rubber band or something around his wrist. The other guy has what looks like a fairly expensive wristwatch. It's very easy for people to start looking at each other and saying, well, you're different than I am. And this is particularly easy when there's an age difference, a gender difference, a racial difference, ethnic difference of some sort. And when people start focusing on differences, they see those differences as bad. And as long as they see them as bad, they don't have any respect for the other person. So you can bet that a relationship like that, if it starts to be conflicted, is just going to spiral downward. So try to find mutual purpose and try to find a way to mutually respect the other person. Okay, so that's my material for tonight on relationships. Now, this is a related sort of thing, but I want to just share with you a few thoughts about it. It's become obvious to me in the past few years that a lot of people just do not answer emails in a reasonable amount of time. And by the way, I'm not talking about email from idiots or spammers. I'm talking about emails from people that you care about, people that are important to you. When you fail to answer an email in a reasonable amount of time, it can send a message to the other person that they don't matter to you very much. And, you know, there's an awful lot of stuff going on in business today about social media campaigns. It's all about building relationships with people, and we use social media to do that. And so there are people that delight in having 9 million friends on Facebook and 10,000 contacts on LinkedIn. There's one fellow in particular I know has 6,000 contacts on LinkedIn. I could have that many. I've met a lot of people in my life, but only a handful of those people are people that I really relate to very closely or interact with very much. And if they're important enough to be in my LinkedIn network and they write me something, I need to try to respond to them within 24 hours. Some years ago, I worked with the CEO of a $50 billion corporation. And I worked with him on a project for a while, and then the project ended, and we stayed in touch for another couple of years. And I tried to be careful not to abuse the friendship and the relationship I had with him. But every time I wrote him an email, he always responded within 24 hours. And it might have simply been thank you, or you bet, or nice to hear from you, or I don't know, I'll look into that, but I always got a response. And I've always said if he wasn't too busy to respond to emails from tons and tons of people, nobody is. And the way I like to look at it is it's really an important component of our jobs, of our lives, that we do that. It'd be like walking by somebody in the hallway and you speak to them and they don't speak back. That's sort of how it works. And so I'm just going to suggest to you, try to set that as a target for yourself, and actually it will be an assignment here at the very end. By the way, I do get inquiries from people sometimes that are clearly spam, and I don't pay attention to those. But if somebody writes me a question or they write a comment about one of the books I've written, I try very hard to give them an honest answer and thank them for writing. And even if I don't agree with them, I still try to respond. Okay, the last thing I want to talk to you about is how to improve your effectiveness. And I don't know how familiar you are with this, but the 80-20 principle has been taught in economics and quality control and so on. And Richard Cook, who's a British writer, has written a book called the 80-20 principle, in which he says this is something that you really need to apply to nearly every facet of your life. Tim Ferriss in the 4-Hour Work Week also talks very at length about the 80-20 principle. and I think all of them are absolutely correct. The 80-20 rule, of course, says that 20% of the things you do yield 80% of your results. 20% of your customers buy 80% of your product. 20% of activities in quality control, or 20% of things that happen, cause 80% of your defects. We talk about the vital few and the trivial many, and one of the problems we have is we tend to get focused on the 80% trivial many things that we need to do, and sometimes we forget to do the 20% things that are absolutely vital. And so if we can find some way to focus on these things and do the 20%, then we will be able to get a whole lot more done. And one of the things about relationships is that about 20% of your relationships enrich your life the most. Give those your highest priority. We're not saying to totally ignore other people or dump them or anything like that, but certainly spend that 20% on the ones that mean the most to you. I have a question about the emails. No, you don't. I don't think, okay, I'm sorry. The question is, are you still supposed to respond to emails within 24 hours when you're on vacation? Absolutely not. And you shouldn't do it in the middle of the night when you're trying to sleep either. Organizations think that they own people nowadays, and I really object to that whole mode of living. That's what those vacation reply things are for. It's also what voicemail is for God's sake. You know, I grew up in a time when we didn't have voicemail, so if people tried to call me and the phone rang and I wasn't there, tough. They didn't get me. And by the same token, you have a right to your own time off without being tied to your workstation. And, you know, turn off your notifications on your phone. Don't answer the darned emails when they come in. Set aside one time a day to do it, or maybe twice if you feel really compulsive about it. Answer emails in the morning and again in the evening if you want to, but do answer them within 24 hours when you're doing a regular work situation. And again, I'm not talking about weekends either. You got to separate all this stuff out, or you are violating the basic principle that we talked about at the very beginning of this series, which is that you have to have some balance in your life. And corporations are taking advantage of people today to the point that it's almost impossible for them to achieve balance. They expect you to have a BlackBerry tied to your stomach or something, and water protected if you're at the beach maybe, and if that darn thing rings, you're supposed to answer it at the beach, and you're supposed to do their assignments and so on. And I think that's totally unreasonable, unless they're paying you a heck of a lot of money, you know. And even then, I think you can't maintain your sanity unless you have some balance. So no, let's be reasonable about that part. Let's say that the rule is within 24 hours of work days, business days. And thanks for that question, because I did forget to say that. Okay, so that's the content for this week. The assignment is to practice actively listening to people. And I'm going to tell you that that is much harder to do than it sounds. But here's a simple way to do it. When someone describes a problem in the workplace to you, and they're saying, you know, we got a problem here and I'm not too sure what to do about it, active listening is a wonderful thing to practice in that situation, because it ensures that you both are clear about what the actual problem is. All too often, as soon as somebody says we have a problem, our old mind starts racing and saying, well, what are we going to do about it? And the next thing you know, you spend a lot of energy trying to solve the wrong problem because there was something there that you didn't hear that would have told you that it was the wrong problem. So if nothing else, active listening is a whole lot easier to practice when there's no high stress, there's no anger, no emotion, and all that sort of thing. So do it that way. Engage people by asking about them in a sincere way. You know, at the very least, you can start to ask people where you're from. You have siblings. Your parents still live there. If it's somebody from another country, you still have family over there. What was it like living in that part of the world or that part of the country? Where'd you go to school? What's your degree in, if you have one? What do you really enjoy doing in your free time? I mean, there's just a wealth of questions that you can ask people if you really care that convey that to them. And people like to talk about themselves. In fact, it's interesting that if you do this right, at the end of the conversation, you'll have people say, that was one of the neatest conversations I ever had. They did most of the talking, but that's okay. I love to learn about people. I love to hear what they enjoy doing and where they come from and how they see things, and it's just a fascinating thing. It's people that make the world interesting in the first place, and all the things that are out there don't matter all that much. Okay, so those are the first two. The third one here is to identify the 20% of things you do that make the most difference in your life. And you're going to find that that's a very small list, and it's really important that you know what those things are, because to the degree that you can focus on doing those and doing those well, you're going to get some big benefits. I am going to tell you that there's a point of view that says that sometimes we should get rid of some of the customers that are in the 80% that don't buy very much from us, but they give us all kinds of grief. Tim Ferriss has a lot to say about that in his book, and I think Tim is right that sometimes there are customers out there that you simply don't need. I have myself, if you want to use the word fire, I have fired a couple of customers because they were giving me so much grief for the return on investment, excuse me, that I just didn't find it worth it. Okay, and so resolve to answer email within 24 business hours, and that says it ends on Friday evening and starts on Monday morning, or whatever your work schedule is. And so that's it. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to take just a minute to say thank you all for your diligence in being here. You know, I really don't know how much value being in a live session adds over a recorded session, because I don't have a good way to make these things really interactive. We can't do dialogue very well with webinars, and it's kind of hard to have activities, but I do appreciate your being here on a regular basis. As I've said before, this list is one that I almost can memorize because it's the same folks every time. And we had 83 people registered for this program, and about 20 of you are here on a regular basis, so thank you for that. I hope it's going to be useful to you. I will post the other 2 lessons in the next 2 weeks, and let me know how these things work out. I'd like to hear from you 5 years from now saying, hey, I've done everything I wanted to do. I've made $1 million or multi-million dollars, or I've achieved some really important objective, because that's what this is all about. So with that, thank you. Do you have any questions? If you do, post a question to me here, and I'll see if I can answer that in the next couple of minutes. If not, we'll take off. The materials are all posted on the website, howcanibesuccessful.ning.com. The videos are all there. Actually, the links to the downloads are there. So thanks to all of you for the comments here. I'm really pleased that you gotten something out of this, and good luck to all of you. I'm gonna pull the plug. Drop me an email if you have any questions to follow up with, and take care of yourselves.